Shaun Tomson was the 1977 world champion on the International World Surfing Tour. A native of South Africa, he spent 14 years on the tour, 9 of which in the top 6. He has most recently been listed as one of the 16 greatest surfers of all time by Surfing Magazine in 2004. He is currently chairman of the advisory board for the Surfrider Foundation and owns the apparel company Solitude in Santa Barbara, California. Today, Shaun joins us to discuss his new book and full-length feature film, Bustin Down the Door, which tells the story of Shaun and his fellow South African upstarts setting the standard for the professional surfing revolution of 1975. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to present to you Shaun Tomson.
Well, thanks, Julie, for welcoming me here, and thanks for that intro. It's great to be down here at Google. I've been a user of Google for, when it first came onto the web, and when I came down here today, I thought I'd Google, and I saw there was 2.7 billion. So it's quite a high number, obviously, an amazing amount of interest, and what the company's done to network the world together. I think it's been an amazing feat. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about networking and community, along with my talk about the book and movie Bustin Down the Door. So I'll talk a little bit about the book and the movie, and then I wanted to talk to you about Surfer's Code, which was a book I wrote a couple of years ago, which is really all about the worldwide community that we live in and how we can interact organically with both the environment and that community. So Bustin' Down the Door, the book that you have there is it's really a photographic expose of what happened during the winter of 1975, which was a very formative winter in the sport of professional surfing. It was a winter. We call it a winter because it is really a 3-month period when all us young guys from South Africa and Australia went to the island of Oahu in Hawaii, to a little 7-mile stretch of beach there, which we call the 7-Mile Miracle, to make names for ourselves. We were all very passionate surfers. We were all very obsessive. We were all, in our own way, talented and incredibly ambitious. And we knew that in order to be successful in surfing, one had to go and challenge oneself against the biggest, most dangerous waves in the world and surf with the best surfers in the world. And at that time, and still today, the center of the surfing universe was this little 7-mile stretch on the island of Oahu in Hawaii. So we all came there from vastly different backgrounds. There are some DVDs floating around here which kind of give you a more in-depth insight into kind of what we had to go through coming to this wonderful kind of mystical island, which back then wasn't really sort of a media center like it is today. So there was 6 of us guys. Rabbit Bartholomew from Australia, kind of a young, scrappy guy, came from a very impoverished background, had to actually steal to eat. So he was almost like a street urchin, but this guy had an amazing vision, a vision of one day we might be able to be respected as surfers, and that one day we might be able to make a living as professionals. And this enthusiasm and vision that he had was very infectious, and certainly Rabbit and I became very, very close friends. We met each other this particular winter, and his enthusiasm and vision really gripped me. And I was at university. I was lucky. I came from a relatively affluent background. My parents were very supportive of my career. I was actually at university at the time studying to be a lawyer. I'm glad I didn't go down that path. But we became fast friends, and along with Rabbit was my cousin Michael Thompson, who was a very, like me, was also at university and was a very courageous individual. And Ian Cairns, a very Australian guy with a big personality, very aggressive, very Australian, very, very nationalistic. And Peter Townend, another Australian, who was also terrifically talented, used to wear pink board shorts. I mean, can you imagine in those days going to Hawaii and wearing pink board shorts? And then lastly, Mark Richards, a guy who went on to become one of the greatest surfers in the world. He became a 4-time world champion. So it was a group of young guys. We were all between 18 and 21, landing on this island at this little stretch of beach, wanting to create a sport, wanting to create a new type of surfing. So we did ultimately achieve our objectives, but at a great price. We were not received with open arms by the local community at the time. There was a perception that our athletic achievements and talking about them and being kind of, the Aussies were very, they loved to get on their soapbox and tell everyone how great they were, that it pissed a lot of people off. And ultimately, a certain small segment of the Hawaiian community, not the great Hawaiian surfers that we all respected, but a certain segment of the community got very, very pissed off with us. We all had to, we all got punched out and beaten up and threatened with death. And it was a really, really serious situation that we all found ourselves faced with. I mean, I went and bought a shotgun. I bought a 12 gauge. I'd recently been discharged from the army. In South Africa, there was a mandatory conscription for all kids that had finished school. So, I mean, I knew my way around a gun, so I had to go and buy a shotgun. I was 19 years old, and Ian Cairns bought a shotgun, and the guys got baseball bats, because it was a really, really tough time for all of us. And it's all detailed in the movie. I encourage you guys, to pick up a copy of the DVD. If there aren't enough DVDs here, as you can get them on Netflix or wherever. But it's a great story about young kids putting their lives on the line just for a dream. And when I look back now and look back to that period and think back to us young guys alone and far away from home, all just such young blokes, and willing to stay there in the face of these death threats, in the face of getting beaten up, just because we loved surfing so much and kind of had this sort of vision that maybe one day it could turn into a sport. So the movie and book both detail that little journey that we took over that winter and the impact that it's had on modern surfing culture and the modern surfing industry. Back then, there was no such thing as a professional surfer. You couldn't get paid to go surfing. And eventually, the money in the industry has built up until surfing today is a multi-billion-dollar industry. There are a number of surfing companies that are publicly traded on both the New York and NASDAQ, with revenue in billions and billions of dollars, paying young surfers millions of dollars just to go surfing. So for us, it's very, very satisfying to see that this young sport that we believed in has turned into something that supports a great crew of young athletes around the world, and also supports thousands and thousands of people that work in this particular industry. And I think more than that, also has given prominence to a sport which ultimately is non-competitive and has brought enjoyment to millions and millions of people around the world. I mean, it was very cool when I walked into Google today and I saw those 3 boards down there as representative of the of surfing culture. And surfing is a wonderful endeavor. It's a wonderful sport. And I encourage all you guys, if you haven't been surfing before, just grab a board and get out there, enroll in a surf school. And you can experience what the best surfers in the world have experienced your first day out there. When you get a board and you lie on that board and you paddle out towards that open horizon, it is truly a wonderful experience. Even before you have a wave, it is really an amazing experience. And surfing definitely brings you back closer to, I think, what's important in life. Life's not all about getting ahead and profit, sales, and growth. It's just about connecting to nature. And it really takes you to a different place, both, I think, metaphorically and literally. You just move off the world that you know into a world that you don't know, that also sometimes you're part of the food chain out there as well. So what I wanted to do is show you a little video that I put together yesterday. I put it together using a little site called Animoto. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Animoto, but it's a really cool little company that's just starting up, and you can put together a 2.5-minute commercial in 5 minutes. And this is a little Animoto piece of the book. These are all images from the book in front of you.
Is there any chance that remote offices could get the video for that also?
So that gives you a little bit of an idea of the essence of our film and the essence of my book. It's just about really dreaming. And that little song, I think, really encapsulates what it's all about. And I found it outside my front door one day when we were trying to decide on the last song for our film. The film was about a year process. We have a wonderful soundtrack, some of the biggest bands in the world, David Bowie, Iggy Pop and the Stooges, Leonard Cohen, some really cool soundtrack. But to find that last soundtrack the last song was very difficult. And some young kid just left it outside my front door one day, and I put it in my CD and play, and I went, boom, that's the song. So, you know, it's amazing how when you have a project, this was the first film that I'd ever done, and I'd always dreamt of telling this little story. And it's amazing that if you put a little bit of effort into something and you kind of conceptually paddle back out, because it was difficult to do, that great things can happen when you just kind of paddle out towards the horizon. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about paddling out towards the horizon and talk to you about this other little book that I wrote called Surfer's Code, and I wanted to read you a little bit of an excerpt from this book. So this book was written, originally it was inspired by a chap called Glenn Henning, who started Surfrider Foundation. Surfrider Foundation, for you guys that don't know, is the biggest surfing environmental group in the world. It has about 60,000 members, and it has chapters throughout the world. Its focus is on preserving surf breaks, keeping the ocean clean, and educating children on how important it is to make a contribution towards keeping the ocean clean. I've been chairman of the advisory board of Surfrider Foundation for about the last 10 years. I was actually the first pro surfer to be involved with it. So it's an organization that I really believe in. And the guy that founded it, Glenn Henning, was having a little surfing competition down at Rincon 5 years ago. And he said, Shaun, I need you to give something to all these children that I've invited down to this competition, something that they would remember. And I'd been in the surfing industry for many years. So I thought, maybe I can phone up Quicksilver. I had a company at the time called Solitude or Billabong, and get some gear and give it to these 20 kids that were coming down there. So I thought, but they're not really going to remember that. So I went home and then I sat in front of my Mac, and in 20 minutes I just wrote down the 12 most important lessons that surfing had taught me about life. Just this kind of stream of consciousness, and kind of the surface code just fell out. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about these 12 simple principles that have really helped me in my life. I'm certainly not up here to preach anything to you guys, but these 12 concepts have really helped me through some very, very difficult times in my life, and have helped me maintain a certain perspective of the world and my place in it. And I've learned it all just from getting on a board and paddling out there to the horizon. So the first is never turn your back on the ocean. This is actually something that the old Beach Boys in Hawaii used to do. They realized that the ocean certainly has dangers, and they also realized that once you get some sort of satisfaction from the ocean, it's important not to turn your back, to kind of give something back. It's a picture of my late father there, and it's a picture of a shark. My father was one of South Africa's greatest athletes at the time. When he was 21, he'd recently returned from the Second World War. He was going on to compete in both the Olympics and the Empire Games, and was savagely attacked by a shark at the height of his swimming career. It ripped out the muscle in his bicep and destroyed his swimming career. You can imagine being 21 years old, and boom, your life as an athlete is done, and kind of you're disfigured. But he never ever let it get in the way of a positive attitude and enthusiasm and a love for the ocean. He never lost his love for the ocean. He never turned his back on the ocean. And I think this, as a young boy, was something that amazed me, that he would I was his firstborn son, that he would show me how to swim and take me out into the ocean, that he'd had this terrible experience. And it was always I think, a great, something that I've always followed, that the dangers are out there, but the dangers are there everywhere. And everything we do in life has some semblance of danger, but it's important to be aware of them and also take care of what you love. I've loved and gotten everything from surfing, and I feel that I have a constant responsibility to put something back. Never fight a riptide. This is my beach where I grew up in Durban, South Africa, a place called the Bay of Plenty. Wonderful, wonderful wave. And this is what we call a riptide in surfing. This is a current that actually just goes out. You get caught in that riptide, you cannot swim against it, you're just going to get sucked out the ocean. And I think for me, this has always operated on a number of levels. My dad taught me at a young age, you get caught in a riptide, you've got to swim across the riptide. You can't swim in against it. And I think there are these inexorable trends that run through our life and through society and that one cannot fight against. And it's important to be aware of these trends because you can bang your head against a brick wall and never get anywhere. Whereas if you use a little bit of a different strategy and a technique, you can flow with the trend. This was really brought home to me by this young bloke on the right here called Mark Richards, who went on to become a 4-time world champion, one of the greatest surfers in the world. This was the type of equipment that we used in the 70s. They were called pintails. That was my quiver, a selection of surfboards that I took with me to ride the big waves in Hawaii. This is a picture of me over here, and that's a picture of Mark. We were locked in an intense competition, the two of us, to see who could wear the shortest shorts. I think maybe I might have just got him, aced him out there. But anyway, Mark developed this new board called the twin fin. You'll see that it has 2 fins on it. We all rode boards with 1 fin. And I saw him surf it for the first time at the end of 1977. I just won the world title. Thought I was feeling pretty good about myself. And I saw Mark out there with this board. And it absolutely blew my mind. It's like you go, I think it's it can be compared to the difference between a wooden tennis racket and a graphite tennis racket, or a car without a turbo and a car with a turbo. Suddenly, surfing was turbocharged. When I saw Mark ride this board for the first time, surfing had entered the age of acceleration. But I was so stubborn and so pig-headed that I wasn't willing to accept this change. And for a year, I tried to continue to ride on these boards, and he smoked me at every event, just dusted me. And I think it was another lesson to me that I was trying to fight a riptide, and I couldn't. And once I got back on the twin fin, I could be competitive, and I wouldn't let him win the short shorts contest thing. Paddle around the impact zone. In surfing, the most dangerous place and the most exciting place is referred to as the impact zone. That's a place where the waves break. That's where surfers like to be, because that's where the excitement is. But also, when you're paddling out, it's a really dangerous place to go because your board's going to get broken, you're going to get smashed into the reef. And when I speak to young kids about surfing, I always encourage them, paddle around the impact zone, because if you try to paddle out through the break, it might be shorter, but you're going to get thumped by the waves, you're going to get run over. And this picture, I think, just reflects what can happen to you when you take a longer route, when you look at an expanse as opposed to just trying to take the shortest route. And the shortest distance is not always the quickest. And this is a picture taken at a place called the Hollister Ranch, which is an area close to where I live in California, and just kind of, I think also it just typifies that surfing experience, a solitary surfer out there with the pelicans coming through in a perfect wave. Take the drop with commitment. This photo is taken at a place called the Banzai Pipeline, the most dangerous wave in the world. More people have been killed at the Banzai Pipeline than the agglomeration of all the deaths in surfing around the world at any particular break. So usually 2 or 3 people eat it there every year. Very, very dangerous. Surfing over a very shallow coral reef. These waves come up out of the deep Pacific, these swells that are generated by storms up in the Aleutian Islands, travel for thousands of miles, come straight out of the Pacific, and bang, they sort of rear up about twice their size. So as the wave hits the reef, it stands up vertically. You can see I'm sort of free falling down on this wave. And what happens is, if you take a wipeout at the top, you're going to get pile driven into the reef. So pipeline is all about the drop, and that drop is terrifically challenging. It's very scary when you're paddling for that wave, and there's a moment when you look down over the drop, and it's just black coral beneath you, and it's really the color of death down there. But you have to take that drop with commitment. You have to take that drop with absolute commitment, with no hesitation whatsoever, because you hesitate, and it's tickets. And I think it's like that in so many things I found in life, is that if you have a goal and an objective, bloody go for it. Otherwise, don't even try. And the pipeline, I think, is really representative of that basic ethos, is take the drop with commitment. Always paddle back out. This is a wonderful shot of one of Hawaii's greatest surfers, a guy called Clyde Aikau, taking a terrifically bad wipeout at Waimea Bay, which is back then was the largest wave in the world. That was like the Mount Everest of surfing. And still today, it's considered the Mount Everest of surfing for paddle-in surfing. In those days, we didn't use any jet ski assist. Surfers would paddle in just using their arms. And this day was one of the biggest days ever ridden in the history of the sport. It just took a bad wipe out. And obviously this concept of always paddling back out is very, very self-explanatory. And, you know, for me, I have always thought that, you know, when one thinks of what is true courage, you know, what is courage? Courage, for me, has always been when you get the shit kicked out of you and you take that bloody beating. And whether it's in life or in the surf, you're going to cop it. You're going to get hammered. You know, you are all relatively young people here, man. You're going to get the crap kicked out of you. But you've got to pedal on your board and get back out there. And it was really hammered home to me the first time I surfed this place, Waimea Bay. I surfed it for the first time during a final when I was 19. I was cocky. I was confident. I was determined to get the first and the biggest wave in the final. And I took off on this wave and got launched into space, very similar to Cloud. And I got the crap absolutely kicked out of me. I actually thought I'd broken my back. I remember swimming in for my board. My board was, in those days, there was no one to help you. Today, they have a guy who will help you if you wipe out. And I swam in for my board about 300 or 400 yards. And my board was floating in the rip current. And I couldn't move my legs. The wave had hammered me so hard on my back with this force that is really indescribable. It's how one would, it's probably like being in an intersection and being run over by a truck or something. You just have this incredible concussive power of the surf. You would think that water is relatively soft, but when you get tons and tons of water just hammering down your back, it's an amazing sensation and an amazing jolt. So I swam and I got to my board, feeling finally came back to my legs. And you know, I was 19 at the time, and I thought, man, I'm 50 yards away from the beach. The rest of the final is 300 yards away, and it was a pivotal moment for me, I think, in my surfing life and both my life is, you know, what should I do? Should I paddle in or should I paddle back out? And at the time, I was young and brave, and I paddled back out. And I always wonder and think back to the time, you know, what would have happened to me if I hadn't paddled back out? What would have, you know, would have I been able to continue with the same life? Would my life have taken a different path? And I really do think it would have taken a different path, because that confidence of getting back out there and just getting a few more waves. I came last in the final. I came sixth in the final. But for me, just the matter of paddling back out there was a great confidence builder for me, and I think really, really helped me with challenges that were to come later in my life. I had a clothing company called Solitude, just to illustrate this whole concept of paddling back out. My wife and I started this company in the 90s. We supplied all the best stores in America: Saks, Barney's, Bloomingdale's, Nordstrom's, Macy's. We were in all these great stores. And it was a startup, the two of us. We were doing, you know, we millions and millions of dollars in sales. And then we ran out of cash. We weren't publicly traded. We were funding the business ourselves. We ran out of cash. And we decided, that's it, you know, the home's on the line. We just don't want any more of this. We decided we're going to close the business down. And our friends came in on a Friday afternoon, and we started moving all this stuff out of our office. We had these beautiful offices up in Santa Barbara. And they came time to dismantle a company server and my workstation. And I said, no, guys, I can't do it. Something's going to happen. I just had this feeling that something would happen. So everything was taken out except the server and my workstation. On the Saturday morning, my best mate up there went to baseball practice, and his child was playing with another child, and the children got chatting, and then my mate started chatting with one of the fathers and was wearing one of our shirts. We made just very, very cool stuff. And this guy said to my mate, man, that's a cool shirt. My friend said, yeah, it's Solitude. He said, the bummer is, these guys are closing down today. So this guy said, man, I love that brand. My father and I are VC guys, and we love that brand. And the Sunday we did a handshake deal, boom, we were away. And the Monday morning we reopened for business. And 3 years later we sold it to a multi-billion-dollar corporation. And I always like to think that day at Waimea gave me that inspiration to paddle back out. There you can go. Watch out for other surfers after a big set. This is a shot of Mavericks. If you guys are surfers, you've heard of Mavericks. Probably the most challenging wave in the world, a killer of a wave. Killed a friend of mine, a guy called Mark Fu. Terrible tragedy. This is a young bloke from Santa Barbara, a guy called Chris Brown, sitting there. He paddled in after he saw this wipeout. And this wipeout was just an absolutely horrific wipeout, a young guy called Jay Moriarty. He was 17 years old at the time. He died a few years later in an accident. But I think as surfers, we have this responsibility, and as people, one has that responsibility to look out for the guy sitting next to you or the girl sitting next to you. I think this whole sense of community is so important for us to bring this concept into our heart. And I know as surfers, when you're out there in the lineup and you take a big wipeout and you get driven down into that reef and you're trying to climb your leg rope, that's what we call it. And if you have a big wipeout in surfing, everyone is wearing a leg rope. The leg rope's sometimes 10 foot long on a big wave board. And you get smashed down so deep, your board comes up, and it's called tombstoning. So your board is buoyant, you're not that buoyant, and then you actually have to climb that leg rope. It's a terrible situation to be in, but you need to be there for that guy, because one day it might be you down there that's getting hammered and someone's going to pull you up. Mark Fu was killed at this break and killed on a crowded day. 40 guys in the water, took a wipeout, and was killed, and no one noticed him. And I don't think because there was any sort of malicious intent, but everyone was so focused on what they were doing that unfortunately he was killed in this day. So that sense of community is, I think, important for all of us, no matter what you do. There will always be another wave. This is what surfing has turned into at some breaks. It's just unbelievably crowded. And sometimes people say, yeah, Shaun, you and Rabbit and Mark Richards, you guys promoted this sport, and this is what you're responsible for. But don't lay a guilt trip on me. But I think one must always realize that there's going to be another wave. And I think this speaks to the fundamental optimism that all surfers have to have. And to know that another wave will come through. And I think it also speaks to the fact that for me, this lesson was hammered home to me in a literal sense out at Rincon, which is one of the greatest waves in the world, a break that I surf all the time, by a guy many years ago. I was out there surfing, and I'd been waiting a long time for a wave, and I swung around to take off on this wave, and this guy paddled around me, around the back of me. In surfing, we call that snaking. So I felt, well, it's my wave. I've been waiting, and this guy's trying to take the wave. And we took the drop, and I faded this guy. It's called fading a guy, and you intentionally make the guy wipe out, and he wiped out. It was a big wave, and I rode the wave in, surfed for a few more hours, and then went into the beach. And I was sitting on the beach, and a guy came up to me, and he said, you Shaun Tomson. And the notoriety that surfers get is very different to the notoriety that most professional athletes get, because the only people that really recognize surfers are surfers. And generally, if a surfer comes up to you, they're very friendly, and they want to chat because they have that commonality of experience. As surfers, whether you're the greatest guy in the world or you're a guy that's just starting out, you have a commonality of experience. So there's a lot of friendliness. I'm thinking, this guy wants to just chat. And I said, yes. He went, bang! I was sitting down with my girlfriend, just sitting down. He went, hit me. Just out of the blue, just cold coffee, just took me like such a shot. So I jumped up. He said, you effing guy, you dropped in on me. And I jumped up, and he turns out this chap was a karate expert. And he was throwing all these haymakers at me, and then he had 3 mates with him who kind of homed in on me. And at Rincon, the beach is surrounded by these big cobblestones. So I picked up one of the big rocks. I said, any of you guys come close, and I'm going to brain you. And they sort of felt it off. And I went to the police, and ultimately I pressed charges, and the guy went to jail. But it was such an unpleasant scene. And I think if I'd been just more cognizant of the fact that, okay, let him go. Big deal. I'll take a little bit of a blow to my ego, but I'll know that another wave will come through. All this drama wouldn't have happened. And it dragged on for about a year. And it was just so bloody unpleasant for me. I think today, in the water, in these crowded conditions, if any of you guys are out there surfing, I think we really have to be aware that another wave is going to come through. All surfers are joined by one ocean. This is an amazing picture of Kelly Slater, the greatest surfer of all time, just recently won his 9th world title, and a chap called Rob Machado. Now, this is during a heat. This is during a semifinal when the world title is on the line. All that needed to happen was for Rob Machado to win this heat, and he would have become world champion. Rob's a very kind of cool, relaxed, sort of California, sort of soul-type surfer. And Kelly is just awesomely talented, very analytical and unbelievably focused on winning. Now, Robert just had an amazing ride. He'd had like a 9-point ride, and all he would have needed to have done was to kick out a little bit before, and then he would have paddled back out and gotten priority towards the next wave, and if he'd have taken the next wave, he would most probably have won the world title. But rather than do that, he rode up to Kelly, and in this height of competition, with a world title on the line, they high-fived each other. And I was on the beach watching in 1995 at the pipeline, and to see this feeling of brotherhood and camaraderie transcend the intensity of competition was great to see. And I think as a surfer, I've always felt that there's this commonality of experience, that it's one ocean out there. And I think, man, what you guys have been doing with your company is connecting the world. And I think as surfers, we really understood this concept of connectedness. We all have, from the moment we started surfing. I started surfing in 1965 and certainly understood this connectedness of surfing, and that we are all joined by one ocean. Pass on the Stoke. As a surfer, I think it's one of the most wonderful things in the world to get someone else stoked. It's like an amazing experience to give something to someone, the wonderful feeling and exhilaration that you've got surfing, to pass it on to someone else. And I just love doing that. I love getting people stoked about surfing. I love talking about surfing. And this concept of giving something that's in your heart to something else, it makes you feel so good when you do it. It doesn't cost one bloody cent. And it just makes you feel good. Not to just like help someone, but just to give some love away. It is a really special feeling. I'd like to read you something that I wrote in my book about passing on the Stoke. It's pretty, it's a little story. My wife and I lost our beautiful boy 2.5 years ago, Matthew, in just a tragic accident. And this is about him and passing along the Stoke. So I'd just like to read this for you guys. Just bear with me for a sec if I find it. I have given surf lessons to my son Matthew. This book came out just after my boy died. I have given surf lessons to my son Matthew. He's interested in surfing. He is not obsessed with it as I was at his age, at least not yet. But we certainly paddle out together as often as possible. The closest break to our home is Hammond's Reef, a beautiful little beach that is typically uncrowded because of its secluded location. We usually park and follow one of the paths bordered with ice plant to a bench that sits on a grassy knoll overlooking the point. Behind us rise the wooded Santa Ynez Mountains filled with trails for hikers and bikers. Before us lies the beach itself, laid with grey cobblestones that range in size from softballs to watermelons and larger. Great tangles of driftwood gather at the high tide line, cast ashore by winter storms. From the bench we can spot swells rolling through, and also remains of campfires among cobblestones that visitors have dragged into rough circles. Matthew and I have our particular stones along the path underneath which we stash our bars of surf wax in case the swell is up, and we decide to paddle out. When the waves are quiet and the wind dies down, the whole atmosphere at Hammond's is calming. We hear the rhythmic sound of the waves and watch the sun glint off the surface of the water, and that resembles a field of sparkling diamonds. Sparkle factor is the expression we surfers use to describe this condition, and it reminds me of why I chose to live and work in Santa Barbara. So Hammond's is a special place for me because I share it with my son. Beyond a touch of serenity in an otherwise hectic world, Hammond's is also home to a Chumash Indian memorial. Much of the coastline in this area was peopled by the Chumash. They thrived here thousands of years before the missionary period in the late 1700s. About half a dozen years ago, Matthew and I were walking along the beach at Hammond's, just checking the surf. Matthew was 9 years old at the time, and he suddenly said, "Dada, let's go and visit the memorial." The memorial sits in Shalawa Meadow, a small clearing just south of the grassy knoll and back from the beach a ways, no more than a few minutes' walk. The cobblestones along the shore give way to scrub brush and large rocks that are havens for lizards. Gopher holes dot the meadow here and there, and the monument stands right in the middle of the clearing. It is 5 feet tall, rectangular in shape, and covered with decorative tiles on the side that faces the Pacific. Between a couple of dolphin figurines are composed the following words. These are such beautiful words. This is on a monument. It's right there at one of the wonderful surf breaks just in this beautiful meadow. The sacredness of the land lies in the mind of its people. The sacredness of the land lies in the mind of its people. This land is dedicated to the spirit and memory of the ancestors and their children. Around the base, visitors have left various rocks, shells, flowers, and driftwood, all pulled from the beach and set in a semicircle so that the memorial also has the feeling of a small shrine. With the mountains rising behind the meadow and the Pacific stretching out as far as one can see, the area has that dramatic quietude common to ancient and spiritual places. One cannot help but think of those who lived and enjoyed this terrain over the centuries, families, fishermen, entire communities, and all the people in centuries to come who will enjoy this meadow, drink in the Pacific vista, and pay their respects to the land. After Matthew and I spent a few minutes gazing at the memorial and added our own offerings, we walked back to the beach. "Dada," he said, and that's what he called me when his friends were not around. "Help me do this." He started to pick up cobblestones, one at a time, and arrange them in large circular shape right on the sand. "What's it you're making?" I asked him. He didn't answer, but kept adding stones to complete the circle. I began to help him without knowing why, simply because he asked me. Once we completed the circle, Matthew began to make a smaller one inside of the first, again by hauling over cobblestones, some of which would have broken his foot had he dropped them. I followed along, walking here and there for likely-looking stones and carting them back. Once we completed the second circle, Matthew began to form yet another one inside the two. He still hadn't told me what we were doing, but I continued to help. By the end, we had 3 concentric circles of stone on the sand. Matthew got down on his knees and shifted several of them around to form an entryway into the very center. Then he left and grabbed 2 rocks, one at a time, to serve at our seats, which he sent at the center of the circle. Once he had done that, he straightened up and scampered down the beach. "Hey," I called after him, "where are you going?" He didn't answer, but continued down the beach to a pile of driftwood. He pulled out a small stick and then began looking around on the ground. As it turned out, he was searching for feathers, probably from a seagull. He then pulled up a small strand of kelp and wrapped it around the feathers to attach them to the wood. I stood and watched as he brought the whole mess back. "What you doing?" I asked again. "It's a sacred story circle," he said. He was 9 years old, my boy. "It's a sacred story circle." "Tell me about it." "What we'll do," he said, "is tell each other stories inside the sacred story circle. When you're telling a story, you have to pass the stick to that other person." "All right," I said. So we sat down there together on the beach. It was the middle of the morning, and no one was around, and we passed the stick with the feathers and the kelp back and forth and just told each other stories. We just made them up. I hardly even remember what we said, but we must have sat there for at least an hour. When I think back on the whole scene, I'm amazed. I sat in the sand with my 9-year-old boy, and we told each other stories inside a sacred story circle. At the time, I didn't make the connection between what Matthew and I were doing and the inscription on the Shumash Memorial, which links us to the past, to the land, and to our children. I was simply following along with his little game. But the special atmosphere at Hammond's Reef itself, the secluded beach, the mountains and the meadow, the small rocks and shells and feathers that visitors leave at the base of the monument as a tribute, all of it has worked on my imagination and memories so that over the years I have come to appreciate that 1 hour more than almost any other time I have ever spent at the beach, including innumerable surf sessions at the most famous breaks in the world. Mostly, I think, because it was an experience that I didn't expect to have, and one that has become inseparable from a special place and special person in my life. The combination of the grounds where I sat and the presence of my son connected me to something altogether larger than myself, to the past and to the land itself, to the future embodied by Matthew, and that has resonated strongly with me ever since. Hammond's is our local break, no more than a 5-minute drive down the hill. Matthew carried a small cobblestone back with him, one that he'd taken from the innermost circle. He set it right outside our front door. "Why'd you bring that stone back home?" I asked him. "You know all those stories we told today, Dada? They're all inside that stone. The sacred story circle and the sacred story stone. I've never been so stoked in my life. When we had left that morning to visit Hammond's, I thought that I was passing along Stoke to my son by visiting the beach and maybe giving him a surf lesson. Little did I realize the gift that he had in store for me, and one that I enjoy every time I think of Hammond's or look at the sacred story stone outside my front door." So that's about passing on the Stoke. So that's all I have for you guys. I'm starting to run out of time, and I wanted to open it up for any questions. So I hope you enjoyed and managed to experience a little bit of what has been so important for me as a surfer. Any questions from anyone? You don't have to be shy.
In the movie, whenever you're interviewed, when you're speaking, you're in a house with lots of nice wood building. What is that?
Oh, that was a house on the North Shore. I actually live now in Santa Barbara, so it's a quick drive for me. It's an hour and a half down here. But we filmed the movie, we filmed all the interviews in the movie on the North Shore, and that was a house right in the right near the surf break in front of this amazing break called Off the Wall. And the film is narrated by Edward Norton, a wonderful actor who's also a very keen surfer. I think he brings quite a laid-back voice to the movie. We definitely wanted a movie that wasn't going to sort of overpower the story, and I think he did a good job. Any other questions there?
Well, what do you think of all the new technology for all the surfboards that are coming out right now? Do you like it? Or?
Yes, I mean, I think for you guys that aren't surfers, surfing is really progressing at an amazing rate. Both the new athleticism in the water is really amazing to see. And a lot of it is because the boards have just become lighter and faster. Technology hasn't really changed surfboards that much. The technology that they're using for, I think, the most cutting-edge surfboards in the world is still the same technology that they were using back in the late 50s and early 60s, which is what they call a polyurethane core and then a fiberglass coating. But there are all sorts of new developments, but they haven't really elevated the performance level of surfing. It's interesting to look at surfing as a sport. You compare, say, surfing to a sport and to a straight athletic sport like track and field. You know, the world record for a 100-meter dash that's held by that guy Bolt is, I think, 9.69 seconds. The world record in 1968, when they started electronic timing, I think was about 9.7 seconds. There's been about a 2% improvement in the performance level of athletes in that particular sport. But in surfing is just, the evolution every year is just amazing. It's very exciting to kind of be a part of a sport that is just sort of evolving so rapidly. But I still think that there's sort of a long way to go with technology. My mate Greg's a very well-known actor, old friend of mine.
I have a question. What's the relationship between the movie Bustin Down the Door and the book Bustin Down the Door? Do they contain the same material?
Yeah, even though Greg's a good mate of mine, he hadn't seen the book until today. I can't believe I didn't give you one, Greg. But the movie, the book is really just sort of just beautiful pictures from that particular period. So a lot of these pictures aren't in the book, aren't in the movie, but I think it just kind of gives you it's something that you can browse through. So it's all from that same period, from that winter of 1975 that changed surfing. So it's something nice to put on the coffee table and just kind of browse through. And it's amazing how a lot of these pictures have held up. Even today, they look, they look great and they look exciting.
One other question on the footage in the film. Obviously, I love it because it's original footage. Did you have a really hard time finding all that?
Yeah, the footage was quite a challenge. We used 19 different surfing films to make up our 96-minute project. We used a lot of footage that I'd had personally. Well, not a lot. I used about 5 minutes of Super 8 footage that I'd had personally that had never been seen before. And then we used a lot of footage that hadn't been seen, for 30 years, stuff from ABC, CBS, NBC, and then all these other great surfing films. And it's amazing that back then a lot of the stuff was shot on 16 and 35, so the quality is really, really fantastic. In the 80s, a lot of stuff went to video. We didn't have anything from the 80s, and that quality has really deteriorated. But we were very lucky. We went back to the original prints and managed to get some really incredible stuff.
Of all the places you've surfed, what's your favorite?
I've been to some wonderful places in the world. My favorite place for surfing is a place called Jeffreys Bay in South Africa. It's this wonderful break on the east coast of South Africa, and I talk in the rest of the I talk in the book about this whole concept of catch a wave every day, even in your mind, and I talk about how important it is to escape. I think both in a metaphorical sense and also in a literal sense Sometimes you can be sitting in front of that computer screen hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours, and then it's just important just to escape. And for me, I always love to escape to this perfect wave in South Africa called Jeffreys Bay. It's a very long ride. When it's really good there, you can ride up to a mile. Most waves only last 10 seconds. That wave lasts about 3.5 minutes, so it's really an amazing experience to put everything together that you know about surfing into this kind of 2 or 3 minute ride. It's a great sensation. So guys, thanks so much for having me here. I really appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed some of the stuff I've talked to you about, and hopefully you'll like the book and the movie. Thanks.